As Christmas Eve, snow thickened across Wyoming's back roads. Walt Coleman wiped down a counter no one had touched in days until headlights pierced the flurry outside. The hum of the jukebox barely filled the silence. Its glow flickering amber in the corner cast warm shadows over empty booths and laminated menus gone soft at the edges. Walt glanced at the window seat, Trish's spot. Her last coffee ring still faintly marked the table like she'd only stepped away to the kitchen and never returned. It had been a slow day, slower than usual, and the register told the story in coins and quiet. He pulled off his apron with a sigh, rubbing his hands along the crease where his wedding band used to be. The diner was bone cold near the windows, but he couldn't bring himself to kill the heat. Not tonight. Another year gone, Trish. He murmured toward the photo tucked under the counter, her in that red scarf, grinning on their first Christmas in Maple Glen. You'd hate seeing it like this. The bell above the door jangled brittle as Ice Jenny Parker stepped inside in a swirl of snow and vanilla. Her cheeks were pink casserole dish nestled in her arms. I told you I'd swing by, she said, setting the dish down with a thud. You didn't think I'd let you wallow alone on Christmas Eve? Thought you might have come to your senses, Walt grunted, but the corner of his mouth twitched. He lifted the lid on the casserole, chicken and dumplings, comfort with a crust. Storm's picking up, she said, unwrapping her scarf. Roads are near invisible. You should shut down soon. Walt, let this stew warm your bones. He nodded but didn't move. They sat for a moment, letting the quiet fold in like an extra quilt. The heater in the back popped and hissed, fighting a losing battle against the draft. Just as he reached to lock the door, a sharp knock rattled the glass. A man stood hunched outside, head low against the wind, clothes stiff with frost. Walt squinted. A trucker probably caught in the storm. Walt opened the door, part way. Can't feel your nose out there, can you? The man looked up, eyes wide under a soaked cap. Truck slid off, heaters dead. I've been walking 20 minutes, sir. I just needed to find light. Walt hesitated. The man was youngish, 30s, maybe Latino, shivering like a leaf. Walt could smell the desperation under the diesel and snow. Sit down, he said, stepping aside, coffee's still honest. The man peeled off soaked gloves, hands shaking. Luis, thank you, sir. Thought I was done. Walt poured him a cup. The pot was old, but the brew strong. Luis took it with both hands like it was treasure. Jenny came over with a towel, draping it around his shoulders. You warm up, she said gently. We've got stew and pie, too, if your stomach's talking. Luis tried to smile but winced, pressing a hand to his side. I'm diabetic. Didn't pack snacks, figured I'd be in Cheyenne hours ago. Then the heater quit. Walt stilled, then wordless, he turned to the kitchen and cracked eggs into a skillet. The rhythm soothed him. Sizzle, flip, steam rising. He fetched the glucose kit from the drawer near the sink, the one Trish had insisted he keep up to date. She would have done the same. He slid the plate in front of Luis' eggs. Toast, a bit of apple from the fridge. Luis ate slowly, reverently. Walt didn't speak, just watched the young man's shoulders ease. The snow outside thickened into sheets, a solid wall of white. Walt walked to the front to peer through the frost-laced glass mug in hand. More headlights appeared through the storm fog. 2 more figures stumbled toward the door. By 8 p.m., the diner's booths, once gathering dust, began to hum again, with weary voices and steaming mugs. Walt stood where Trish used to run the kitchen like a command center. She'd have laughed at this chaos, grilled cheese on a pancake griddle, chili bubbling in a pot she once used for stew. He could almost hear her voice over the clatter of mugs and boots. No one freezes under our roof, Walt. You know that. Outside, the snow kept coming thick as secrets, burying the lot out front and swallowing the horizon whole inside, though Lone Star Haven flickered to life like a stubborn ember catching wind. 7 truckers now filled the booths, some still shaking off the cold, others spooning canned chili like it was a feast. The old jukebox wheezed a tune from Johnny Cash, the chords twanging low beneath the laughter starting to swell. Jenny moved between tables, coffee pot in one hand, towel in the other. She wiped down wet counters and cracked jokes with the kind of ease you earned from years of watching people unravel at closing time. Grilled cheese for the brave, pie for the foolish, she called, setting down a plate in front of Caleb, the youngest of the bunch. He blinked, still dazed. Or both, if you've got a death wish and a strong stomach. He offered a nervous laugh, barely more than a breath. Guess I'll test my luck. Walt stepped out from the storage room, arms full of blankets, socks, and a few hand warmers that had probably expired, but still might do some good. He placed them near the coat pile that had grown by the booth closest to the kitchen. Henry, gruff and hunched in his 60s, raised a brow. This some kind of Red Cross op, Walt? Walt shrugged. Nah, just didn't throw anything out. Sam, who'd taken a quiet leadership role among the group, looked up from his bowl. My uncle used to talk about you. Said back in '83, a vet with a busted knee flagged down help for 6 drivers stuck behind a rock slide near Thermopolis. Swore the guy had a diner out near Buffalo. Walt didn't answer, just ladled another serving of chili and passed it across the counter. Sam smiled knowingly, but let it lie. The snow pounded against the windows, relentless now. Jenny tightened her scarf, despite the heat from the stove. A few drivers set up a makeshift tip jar with a note scrawled on a paper napkin for the road. Crumpled bills found their way in without fanfare. Someone dug a harmonica from a coat pocket and coaxed out a trembling tune. Jenny hummed along absently as she refilled mugs. Caleb chuckled between bites. First snowstorm I ever got caught in hot. It'd be a silent night, silent. In Wyoming. Henry snorted, son. Wyoming laughs at your silence. Then without warning, the lights cut out. A groan swept the room like the storm had finally slipped a hand around their throats. The jukebox died mid-note. Coffee warmers hissed and went still. Jenny's voice broke the quiet. Walt, no panic. Just his name, low and sure. He didn't answer right away, already moving toward the back room. The old potbelly stove stood cold in the corner, its iron belly long, empty. He struck a match, careful and precise, and fed the flame with wood from the emergency bin he'd kept just in case. Lanterns glowed one by one. He'd taught himself long ago not to trust the grid. Within minutes, the shadows retreated, and the warmth returned, this time from firelight, and something quieter, steadier. The truckers gathered near the stove, sipping coffee, now heated over the flame boots, drying along the base. Jenny passed out to the last slices of pie. Laughter resumed, softer this time, wrapped in awe and fatigue. As Caleb stretched his legs, his gaze caught something glinting in the kitchen window frame, half hidden by frost and time. He stood, walked closer, and leaned in. "It that?" he asked, voice hushed. A dusty medal hung there, suspended from a fading ribbon. It swayed gently in the heat. Walt didn't look up from where he sat, wrapping a clean pair of socks. "Yeah," he said simply. Caleb didn't press. He just sat back down, the firelight flickering across his face. "Is that what I think it is?" Sam asked, eyes fixed on the medal. Walt said nothing, just poured more coffee and looked away. The silence stretched thin like a wire pulled too tight. Steam curled from the chipped mug in Walt's hand as he busied himself behind the counter, fingers steady, expression blank. The metal, dulled with age but unmistakable, swayed gently from the window frame above the stove. Jenny, wiping down a booth with a damp cloth, glanced over. She didn't say anything at first, just kept moving like she was polishing the memory itself. The wind howled outside, pushing against the diner's old bones. Inside, the air stayed warm, thick with the scent of coffee and grilled cheese. Damp gloves dried across the backs of chairs, and the windows sweated against the cold. Sam tried again, quieter this time. "You don't have to talk about it, Walt, but that medal doesn't hang itself." Walt looked up briefly, eyes unreadable beneath his weathered brow. "Ain't much to talk about," he muttered. "It's just decoration." Jenny snorted softly. "You ever hear how Walt rerouted a dozen rigs during Katrina? CB went nuts that week, saw her out all over the Gulf. He stayed on channel for 2 days straight, guiding folks through back roads he knew from his own routes." The room shifted subtly. Conversations died down. The jukebox had long since gone quiet again. Even the fire in the stove seemed to still Henry, who hadn't said much since the chili looked up, mate. "Keep west of the grain tower over the ridge past mile marker 212. "That was you." Walt didn't look up. Just kept stirring the coffee pot. "Might have been," he said. Henry leaned back, mouth curling into a half-smile. "Damn! That voice pulled me out of a real bad spot in '97. I always figured it was someone with a map and a conscience. Didn't expect it'd be the guy who just fed me canned chili," Jenny chuckled and nudged Walt with a towel. "You got more miles in your head than the rest of us put together." Sam folded his arms. "You really turned down a spot on Channel 5 last year. They ran a whole segment on Quiet Heroes of the Plains. I think they even used a photo from the diner." "I don't do cameras," Walt replied, "or parades, or speeches." "Well," Caleb said softly, "maybe you should have." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the wind clawing at the windows. Then Sam stood, no fanfare, no words, just a slow, deliberate rise. He squared his shoulders and raised his hand to his brow. The salute was crisp, held with the kind of gravity that needed no explanation. Walt froze, then Henry stood, followed by Caleb. One by one, each driver rose to their feet, silent as falling snow. Jenny, standing behind the counter, now placed a hand over her heart. Walt blinked a few times, cleared his throat. "Y'all are making this old coffee taste like bourbon," he said, voice cracking just enough to betray him. Someone chuckled. Jenny reached for the percolator and poured another round, hands a little shaky. Outside, a gust of wind slammed against the window with a shuddering whoomp. The flame in the potbelly stove danced violently for a moment, then steadied. Sam turned his head toward the sound. That didn't feel like just wind. Through the frost-lined glass, a strange glow emerged over the snow-covered parking lot. Low, wide headlights, not the tall beams of semis, not the sweeping arcs of plows. Walt stepped closer to the window, squinting past the reflection of the diner's soft light. A vehicle approached fast, too fast for the conditions. Tires hissed across the ice. Not a truck, not from here. The lights grew brighter, closer, and they didn't look like they planned to stop. At dawn, Walt stood at the window sipping lukewarm coffee, then blinked twice as a convoy of trucks slowly emerged through the misting snow. The steam from his mug barely curled anymore, but he didn't notice. His hand trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from something else, something that crawled up from his chest and sat square behind his ribs. The snow had softened overnight into creamy banks that blanketed the lot like frosting. The rigs parked outside shimmered with a dusting of gold as the sky brightened, and now cutting through the morning hush, the low rumble of engines swelled. Walt squinted against the light, uncertain. The trucks, 14 at least, weren't from last night. Their exteriors bore different paint jobs, some with company logos, some bare. One cab had a wreath tied to its grill, another towed a trailer with a faded American flag painted across the back door. Jenny stepped up beside him, resting a hand on his arm. "Let it in," she whispered, her voice no louder than the ticking of the wall clock. "Whatever it is, let it in." Walt didn't move, just blinked again. The trucks pulled in with patient grace, lining up like a procession, each driver exiting with slow reverence. One by one, they approached the front of the diner, arms full, boxes, coolers, tarps, tools, cans of coffee, batteries, blankets. Walt opened the door before anyone knocked. The first driver to approach was broad-shouldered, his jacket zipped to the neck, gloves stuffed in one pocket. "Mr. Greaves," he asked, "we heard what you did last night. Sam's post went viral on a couple of trucker forums. You've got friends you didn't even know you had." Sam stepped forward from the rear, a grin spreading across his wind-chapped face. "Told you Walt kindness doesn't melt in a storm." Another driver came up behind the first, handing Walt a thick envelope. "Some of us chipped in," he said, eyes lowered out of respect. "Fuel costs, repairs, diner stuff, just a way to say thanks. You've done more for this community than most folks ever get to." Walt opened the flap slowly. Inside were bills, 20s, 50s, even a few hundreds, and a folded sheet of lined paper. Before he could read it, a third driver, older with a beard frosted from the drive, approached with something tucked under his arm. "Built this with my daughter," he said almost shyly. "Thought you might want it." It was a wooden sign, sanded smooth, the letters carved by hand. Walt's Diner. Heroes Haven. Walt didn't speak, he couldn't. He just ran a weathered thumb along the edge of the sign, lips pressed into a line that twitched at the corners. Then came the young woman, not in uniform, but somehow carrying the same calm confidence as the rest. Brown hair tucked into a knit cap. Gloves with holes at the fingers. "My name's Emily," she said gently. "My dad was a driver. You helped him once after a landslide in Utah. He talked about you for years. I always wanted to meet you." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I don't remember names much anymore," he murmured, "but I remember moments." Sam clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Well, this moment's yours." Jenny, standing behind the counter, now busied herself adjusting the pie rack with trembling fingers. She didn't look up, but her cheeks were pinker than usual, and she wiped them with her sleeve when she thought no one noticed. A young man pulled out a guitar, strummed a soft chord, and soon a Christmas tune floated through the diner like the scent of fresh cinnamon rolls. Someone passed around hot cocoa from a thermos, and laughter bubbled up, warm and real. Walt, still holding the envelope, finally reached back inside. Nestled between the cash and folded bills was the piece of paper, thick, cream-colored, hand-signed. It was a letter. "Dear Mr. Greaves, on behalf of the National Trucker Brotherhood and its affiliate associations, we would be honored if you would attend and speak at our annual gathering this February in Louisville. You represent the very heart of what we do. With deep gratitude, Alan Briggs, President NTBA." Walt's hands stilled. His thumb traced the ink, slow and uncertain. The guitar strummed softly behind him. The smell of cocoa lingered. He looked up out through the fogged glass across the rigs lined up in reverence, and then back down at the letter. The words didn't quite fit in his head just yet, but they would. The sign read, "Closed for Christmas," but inside Walt's Diner, every seat was full and no one was in a rush to leave. The booth cushions, long used to silence, now bore the weight of laughter, elbows leaning in, and the clang of coffee mugs meeting plates. The windows, once fogged with cold, and time shimmered with light. Outside, the snow shone like a postcard, and inside, the hum of voices, the scent of sizzling eggs, and a faint Bluetooth speaker warbling an old Everly Brothers tune carried a warmth that had nothing to do with the thermostat. Walt moved through the narrow aisle between booths with a pot of fresh coffee. He wasn't limping this morning, or maybe he was, but no one noticed, especially not him. The man who'd once feared letting anyone in now had to navigate offers to help fix the wiring, retile the back pantry, even restock the condiments. Caleb leaned over from a stool, eyes bright behind thick glasses. "That new coffee machine, faster than a truck stop on triple time. Got that thing plumbed in like a dream." Behind the counter, Emily scrubbed the sink with sleeves rolled and hair tucked under a ball cap that read "Freight and Forward Midwest." Jenny stood beside her, cracking eggs with one hand, laughing at something. Henry mumbled about overcooked bacon. The room pulsed with familiarity, but not the kind born of habit. This was something new. Walt paused near the window, watching as Sam crouched outside, helping Henry rig a makeshift snow-melt gutter to direct runoff from the awning. Nearby, two other truckers unfurled a tarp across the damaged freezer unit behind the building. Their movements were slow, deliberate, the way men move when they're not in a rush to leave. Back inside, Jenny hollered, "Someone better play that Blue Christmas before I do it myself." A small giggle answered her. A young girl with curly hair and pigtails peeked from behind Sam's coat, then shuffled toward Walt. In her mittened hands was a folded sheet of paper. "For you," she whispered. Walt crouched slowly, knees popping like stovetop corn. He unfolded the paper carefully. Crayon lines, a square with a red roof. Stick figures smiling inside. A little yellow sun above it. Walt's Diner, safe place. He cleared his throat. "Well, that's just about the finest art I've ever seen." Jenny leaned over from the counter. "She's Sam's niece, said she's never seen so many happy grown-ups in one room." Emily dried her hands and joined them. "I used to drive full-time," she offered gently. Turning to Walt, "Now I work logistics out of Rapid City. I've got some pull with the route database. Would you mind if I list your place as a preferred stop for our trucks? Could mean a steady stream." Walt nodded slowly. "Only if they like burnt toast and lukewarm sass." Caleb chuckled across the room. "Hey, that toast wasn't burnt. It was aged, like wine or rust." A fresh round of laughter spilled across the diner. As plates were cleared and coffee refreshed, Walt wandered toward the jukebox, the old Seaburg model that hadn't worked right since '09. He rested a hand on the side thumb, brushing the chrome panel where his wife used to press her favorites. There, still stuck under the scratched plastic, was the label for track A2 Silver Wings. Jenny approached slowly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She didn't speak. Just watched as he stared at the machine like it had something to say. Walt finally looked over. Maybe this place isn't meant to fade after all. The front bell jangled and the room quieted as a woman stepped in, dressed neatly in a navy coat, clipboard in hand, a city seal embroidered on the breast pocket. "Mr. Greaves?" she asked, scanning the room with a kind smile. "I'm from the city council. Our office has received quite a few letters about what happened here last night. We'd like to discuss nominating you for our annual humanitarian award." 1 year later, the truckers came, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The sky over Maple Glen was a watercolor of autumn golds and slate blues. Flags waved gently along Main Street, their fabric soft from years of use but no less proud. Inside Walt's Diner, the air smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee with a hint of wood polish and cinnamon. The booths were full before 8. Veterans in caps stitched with old divisions shook hands over pancakes, and truckers in flannel passed steaming mugs down crowded tables. Walt stood at the grill, apron tied slightly askew, spatula in hand. He cracked eggs with a precision born of repetition, letting them sizzle beside hash browns and sausage links. His back ached more these days, and he paused now and then to stretch, but his hands never wavered. Jenny moved through the floor like someone who had always been meant to run this place. Her laugh was easy, her memory sharper than the edge of her serving tray. She refilled coffee for Henry, without asking, and handed Caleb his usual 2 eggs, over easy, no toast. Caleb had grown into himself, the rookie nerves now replaced by a quiet confidence. He wore a jacket with his company's logo embroidered neatly, and had a Bluetooth in one ear, though he turned it off for breakfast. Emily sat at the counter laptop, open talking shop with 2 drivers new to the region. Her eyes scanned routes while her hand stirred her coffee absently. On the wall behind her, a framed newspaper clipping from last Christmas hung between 2 black and white photos of Walt in uniform. A new voice broke through the warmth. "Mr. Greaves." Walt turned. A young waitress couldn't be more than 18 stood there, eyes wide, holding a tray of clean glasses. Her name tag read Mia in hand-drawn cursive. "Yeah," Walt replied, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Why do you keep that old radio out front?" She gestured toward the counter where a dusty CB set sat, its mic curled like a snake beside it. He followed her gaze because someone might still call in someday, he said with a half-smile. From the main table, Caleb stood and tapped a butter knife against his glass. The room quieted, but it wasn't awkward. It was reverent. "I just wanted to say something real quick," Caleb began. "A year ago, we showed up here half-frozen, scared, thinking we'd been forgotten, Walt. You kept us warm that night. We'll keep this place warm forever." Applause rose like a tide, followed by claps on the back, and murmured thanks. Jenny wiped at her eye discreetly. Before gesturing toward the front windows, "Walt," she said, "come with me." He followed her outside into the crisp morning light. The sidewalk gleamed slightly from last night's frost. A cloth banner hung over the porch rail. Jenny pulled the ties loose, and the new wooden sign behind it was revealed. "Walt's Haven. A light for every traveler." The lettering was carved, the paint fresh. Above it, a carved lantern glowed softly from a solar bulb tucked under the awning. Walt stared at it for a moment. Then from inside the diner, the CB radio crackled. "Breaker 19. Anyone got ears on Walt's Haven?" He turned, brows lifting, and walked back inside. The room stilled as he stepped to the counter and picked up the mic. "Walt's Haven. We're listening." The reply came a second later. "Heard this place saved my dad last Christmas. Be there in an hour, don't run out of pie." A round of laughter broke out across the room. Someone strummed a few bars on a battered acoustic guitar. Walt chuckled low in his throat and shook his head. Behind him, Jenny poured a fresh pot of coffee. Caleb leaned back in his chair, boots crossed under the table as Mia asked if anyone wanted more apple butter. The radio buzzed again, another voice, another memory in the making. And through it all, the light stayed on a cold Wyoming night. A quiet act of kindness lit more than just a diner. It rekindled connection, memory, and the kind of warmth that lingers long after the snow melts. Walt never asked for gratitude, but in giving shelter, he found belonging. Sometimes it's the weathered hands that reach out first, and the softest voices that carry the loudest. Truths never underestimate the quiet ones. They may just be holding the light. Like a porch lamp left burning for someone still on the road, simple goodness has a way of guiding us home.